close till I get up. Time is barely on our side. I don't wanna waste what's left. The storms we chase are leading us, and love is all we'll ever trust. Yeah, no, I don't wanna waste what's left. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go. Finding life along the way, melodies we haven't played. No, I don't want no rest. Echoing around these walls, fighting to create a song. I don't wanna miss a beat. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, till my shadow turns to sun rays. And on we'll go, through the wastelands, through the highways, and on we'll go.
All right, good evening, everyone. Hope you all had a great Thursday. So tonight we have a lot going on. So we're gonna go through kind of some development that I made over the weekend. Try not to spend too much time on it, and then we're gonna dive into creating some tests. So unit testing specifically. Using the Pytest library. It's very popular with Python. And so, yeah, that's kind of where we're going to go tonight. As always, if you have questions, feel free to ask in the chat. If you just want to bring something up, put it in the chat and we can talk about it. Let me bring up the chat because I realize on the stream it's not up. There we go. Hey Nick, how are you doing? I'm doing pretty well, and yeah, I had a kind of long day, but yeah, doing really well. Hopefully you're doing well. Yeah, so I guess to start out, I think best is to kind of go over what I did over the weekend. Some of the changes that I introduced, some of the features that I added, and then we'll dive into kind of things. It's crazy. There's a lot of things that need to happen, and I kind of just I'll go to the different pages and be like, hey, I should add something there, or hey, I need to remove something here, or edit something. So we won't get. Hopefully, I won't get too sidetracked. But if you've been in the stream before, I'm really bad with that, so yeah. So we'll go ahead and get started here in a second. You're doing well. Got out of the gym a little late, but made it in time to see the start of your stream. Sweet, and good. Congrats on because I think you mentioned you started going to the gym again recently, right? Or have you always just kind of been going to the gym? The gym is a great thing, so glad to know that you're going. It's I always say like that's like the fix for a lot of things in life is exercise and kind of putting that physical strain on your body. Feels like I'm getting old. Felt some knee discomfort on my run. Yeah, I mean I've gotten knee swelling and knee discomfort, and knees are like, I took up running for a few months. I would say probably like 4 or 5 months. Actually was enjoying it. I started enjoying it a lot. But yeah, I could feel it. I could feel it all through my legs, whether it's my hip, my like knees, the shins. But yeah, it's definitely no joke. Gym's been off and on for you. It's been a month of consistent time so far. That's good. I think the key with the gym too is finding that time that is non-negotiable. It's a time that like you'll have every day. It's not dependent on anything, if that makes sense. So like as an example, I started going to the gym June of last year, and ever since then I've been going roughly, I would say 3 to 4 days a week on average. I try to go 4 days a week, and I go at 5 a.m. every day. The 4 days a week, every day that I go to the gym. And I go that early, not because I'm the like, oh, got to get up extra early, be the first one there. I just know that there's nothing else I'm doing at that time. And you might be like, well, you could sleep, but I choose to adjust my sleep schedule to allow for me to go that early. So I try to go to sleep around 9 p.m. Obviously, like during streams, streams are roughly 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. I only go to the gym Monday through Thursday. So I purposely do that, so that way it's non-negotiable. If I don't go, it's my own fault, because whether I'm too tired or don't want to get up, or you know what I mean. So I know that my strength and cardio performance has been improving. Feel a little bit thinner around the waist, as some shorts been feeling a little looser. Yeah, that's always a good feeling. And the crazy thing is, like, it sounds cheesy, but like it really does feel good to notice performance. If that makes, like, notice performance, or like you said, notice like getting a little thinner. Obviously that's why a lot of people go to the gym, but like when you actually notice it, it's such a good feeling. I do a 3-day split, 2 times a week with an active rest day. Hilly walk. Yeah, I always try to get a walk in as well. So it's not, I mean, you call it cardio, but it just flushes out the system, and it's always good to have. It doesn't look it for sure yet. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I guess that's the difference, right? It's like I'll say this. Over the past year, I've been trying to bulk, I guess you could say. Not necessarily bulk for size, but muscle mass. And so, like, I've been eating more calories, but I've been focusing just basically from I do some leg day, but obviously, everyone, like, leg day is the worst. So like I've been working on like basically the waist up, right? So abs, shoulders, arms, and I've personally only started noticing it, right? And this is about a year later, but I remember back at the holidays, people would ask if I was starting to go to the gym because they would notice already, right? That's only 6 months in, which I find to be pretty impressive. So I always feel like other people see that before the changes before you do. Slow changes might go unhealthy to go too fast and hard. Yeah, you're not wrong. It's definitely unhealthy if you try forcing too much too quickly. So the diet's the hardest. So the diet is something it comes and goes, man. Some days I'm like, yeah, I wanna bulk, so I gotta just eat more calories. But then it's like, okay, well, there's a certain way to bulk, right? Like, you can't eat a bunch of junk food and say, hey, that's my calories for the day. You have to eat the right amount or the right type of calories, and get your proteins and, whatever I guess your diet is asking for. Some diets, they cut red meats out completely. It's very vegetable heavy. So I'm no expert, so really kind of just BSing a little bit. Hey Blues, how are you doing? Blues, I will say you opened my eyes to that SSH auto detect in NetMiko last week. I took that and ran with it this past weekend, so I appreciate it. Thank you. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I like the conversation. Let's keep it up. But I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Otherwise, I won't get too far into what I want to do. So, I added this new page. I added the inventory section. I think where we ended was with the results page. I believe, yeah. So I think we ended last stream where we had the results page, right? So this past weekend, I went pretty hard into it with the development. So I created this inventory link here. And please, I forget where I left off with the stream and with everyone. So, if you're like, hey, we already went over this, please let me know in the chat. Someone say that main gain is the way, progressive overload to make the muscles grow, then eat more to maintain and grow the muscle with protein. Yeah, that's true. Have you already integrated that feature? Imagine you're talking about that auto detect feature. Yes, and that's actually what I'm going to go over here in a second. So we have the device inventory. Maybe this is what we did last week, but regardless, we have add a device host name, and device IP. You see how I don't have the operating system here anymore. So the way this works in the back end is really all I need is the device IP. The host name will only be considered if the host name cannot be discovered via the device IP, or during the discovery process, I should say. The way the discovery process works is, let me pull that up real quick. So the way the discovery process works is, let me find it here. So I take in user credentials. So this is kind of, I need to add to this, and this is where we were talking about bolting on the credentials piece. Like kind of a credentials module, however that looks, right? Whether you plug stuff in a form and press save and it's encrypted and put into storage, persistent storage, or whether we include it with the device. Initially, I'm looking at creating like a vault where you would have those credentials, and then it would call from the vault. So maybe I might create something myself, or I might integrate with a popular tool like a HashiCorp vault. Still TBD. For right now, I'm basically just getting from two environment variables. I'm calling it nc_user and nc_password. NC obviously for NetCheck. And I created this function here called device connection, and it plugs in device IP and the credentials, right? And the device IP is what comes from the form. You can see I'm not using the device host name. The only way I'm using that is, like I said, if it doesn't get discovered in this discovery process. So let me quickly jump to the device connection real quick. We'll see that we have an IP address. Yes, you can laugh at me. The type annotation or the type hint is a string. It probably and should be in like an IPv4 address or IPv6 address, right? Which obviously you can get from the IP address library. But for right now, like I said, it's a work in progress as always. So that, and then we're expecting a dictionary of the credentials, which you saw in the main part. And then this is Blues. This is actually this is where you should see, like, you'll see the auto detect feature. So Blues introduced that auto detect feature last week. That's part of NetMiko, right? And the way it works is basically you plug in auto detect as the device type, and then you do this little you feed that into the SSH detect class, and then all you do is auto detect. And the way this works on the back end is it basically runs, because we looked at the source code last week. NetMiko logs in the device, SSH to the device, looks at the show version, and basically using a regex expression figures out whether it's a Cisco iOS device, an Arista device, a Juniper device, and so on. And basically what I'm doing is saying, hey, with the best match that you get from NetMiko, we're going to then assign it to the device type. We're going to overwrite where it says auto detect, and we're going to take the best match it got, and we're going to feed it into the connect handler, which, for those familiar with NetMiko, connect handler is kind of that constructor class that allows you to make connections and connect to the device, run commands, and so on, right? So now I have this connection. You can see I did, kudos here. I put it in a try and accept block, so that way if the device isn't responding, or let's say your credentials aren't correct, we catch the two NetMiko exceptions for that, and then we'll print out an error. And yes, I'm using a print statement. I do need to go through, and I actually do need to configure a logger, but for right now it's kind of just printing out. And as you can see, if there is an exception, it will return none. So this basically is just a connection object, or connect handler object that's returned from this device connection. Come to think of it, this needs changed as well, because it's not just a string, it's a connect handler. So let me do that actually. Actually, we'll just, yeah, connect handler. So that way we know, okay, it's returning a connected. And remember, type hinting, type annotations are not, unless you're using like MyPy to do your code analysis, it's not like it will error out due to type annotations, right? Because it doesn't run against runtime, or it's not ran at runtime, if that makes sense. I did find a library. I will say this: I found a library called TypeGuard that actually will run or check your type annotations at runtime. Never used it, but I found that pretty interesting. Dan, what are you using in the front end part? Any specific framework? No, Blues. I'm not using any sort of like JavaScript framework. I'm not using React or anything crazy like that. Strictly just using Fast API and Jinja2 templates for with HTML. For the JavaScript piece, just a little sprinkle of jQuery, and I guess you could say Bootstrap, but it's not. Bootstrap's not really like it's not a front end framework. It's it's a little mix of CSS and JavaScript. But hopefully that answers your question. Hey Matt, thank you for joining. I see you here. I hope you've been. I know you're on the other side of the world, but hopefully you've been keeping up with the Ravens YouTube channel. Has been releasing a lot of stuff from training camp. So I've been watching it as it's been going on. So hopefully you're able to keep up with it. You should be using Vault for the creds. Yeah, I know, Blues. I know. That's why I tried getting ahead of you there, because I knew there were some criticism there. There will be. For right now, it'll just be environment variables, but we'll get there. Matt, yeah, I'm loving the training camp footage. I'm pretty sure we're going to go into the Super Bowl. Matt, I hope so. First, they need to figure out Lamar's deal, right? His contract. But yeah, once we get over that hump, we're looking good. I really like this team, so we'll see. All right, so now we have the device connection, right? And if you see here, basically this device connection, it's kind of redundant. I put it in a variable called device, and we're saying, hey, if it's not none, because remember, if there's an exception, it returns none. If it's not none, then we'll go through and discover the device. And the device discovery, this is where, we're passing in a connect handler object, right? Because we already got it from the device connection function. And for right now, we're just supporting Cisco iOS. Really, that's only because that's what I use in my lab. In the future, we probably will build this out to be like its own class, right? And that way we can say, hey, there's, we can make it a little more object-oriented versus this is very, functional as just a function passing it in and saying, hey, if it's this, let's do that, or, and so on. But so we're only supporting Cisco iOS, and then you can see here what we're doing is we're going through running show version, and then we're parsing it using Genie, the Genie parser, and then we're creating a device inventory object, right? And remember, this is what actually I don't know if we looked at that yet. The device inventory object basically takes in is this here. So we talked about it last week about what we want to include in our inventory table, right? So as a user, what's important to you? So we want host name, management IP, a vendor, model, operating system, and serial number of the device. So you can see here, we build that model right here in this function. So we run show version, we parse it out using Genie, and then we just parse out the facts and the details that we want from the parse data, and we throw it right into the model, and then we return the model, right? And so you can see here, we return it down here. There's a bunch of exceptions that we handle, right? Going back to the timeouts and the authentication, because remember, in this auto detect, or I'm sorry, the device connection, we are connecting to the device, right? We're essentially running show version and doing a regex. And same thing down here, but the difference being is that we're taking this data and we're parsing it using Genie, and then we're gonna get this information that we want, right? So there's still a chance we get the same exceptions, the timeouts, the authentication. Maybe we connected to the device, figured out its device type, and then it went down for some reason. So we still need to handle those exceptions, right? And so it'll return none if it times out, or if there's an exception, or if it's not a Cisco iOS device. So you might be like, he doesn't really have too much like exception handling here. So like, let's say device type does equal none, or let's say for whatever reason it can't figure out the device type, it would error out during the device discovery, right? Because we're saying, hey, if the device type doesn't equal Cisco iOS, then we're going to return none. So yeah, it's kind of an extra step here, but for right now, I feel like it's all happening at once anyways, right? The device connection, figuring out the device type, and then doing the discovery. So feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. I know I kind of just went through a lot there, but basically this is like our little device discovery module. Just to wrap up this piece here, we save that device object to a device record. Going back to the device host name that you fill into the form, if that device record, that host name field, right? If you go back to the model, we have a host name field. If that is empty, then we will assign the device host name to be the device host name that we get from the form, and you'll see that up here. Else the device, actually there's no else, right? Because if it's not equal to none, that means that it did find a host name. And then down here it's saying, all right, well, if the device record equals none or is not none, right? So let's discover the device, connected, discovered the device, got everything it needed. We'll take that model that we created and we'll write it to the database, right? And then we have this little variable here, add status equals true. All this does is we feed this value to the front end, the Jinja2 template actually. We feed it to the Jinja2 template to say, hey, we've added this device to inventory. So, and then that way, what happens is on the user, the front end, you plug in the IP and the host name, and then there'll be a little greener, basically a little text to say, congratulations, device has been added, or a red text to say, oh, sorry, the device was not added successfully. And just to show you, so my lab isn't on right now, so it should fail, right? Actually, I'll just put in an IP address that I know doesn't work, right? Right. So and this is another thing to actually show. These little green check boxes validates the data. So we actually do have, and there you go. So it went through, it tried connecting the device, it timed out, it caught the exception, and returned the device object is basically none. And now we're saying, all right, something went wrong, device was not added to the inventory. But to go back to those little check boxes, it does input validation. So for the host name, you could put anything, right? So let's say we're just going to call it devrouter2, but the IP address, you can't put like Cisco. So you click submit, and you see here, right? There's a kind of a red alarm to say, please enter a valid IPv4 address, right? So the only thing I need to do is, and just to go through it one more time because I talked over it, right? And you can see it checked it right there. And this is all built with Bootstrap. This is all included, so that's why it's working. It's built into the Bootstrap, the JavaScript library. But yeah, now everything looks good. The only thing is, you see this message, it doesn't disappear right away. This is something I got to figure out with the front end, probably a little bit of JavaScript. Because right now this value comes from whether it goes through the whole process and then it returns, says, hey, it either got added or it didn't. And you'll see here, again, it says it was not added properly. So yeah, we got that pretty much worked out. Right now it's obviously only for one device. But in the future, I feel like I could scale it to where we would have to use NetMiko asynchronously to try to connect to multiple devices, right? And do that auto detection across multiple devices. So yeah, I just got to figure that out. But for right now, I'm just sticking with one device, keeping it simple, and then figuring out, kind of to scale from there. Blue says, for the additional exceptions, check the paramiko SSH exception. Maybe there's a missing one. I did. So actually, those two exceptions that you saw, Blues, inherit from that exception, I believe. Because I did look at it. Maybe they reference it. I feel like, though, that they inherit from that. But yeah, it probably wouldn't hurt to add it to that list. Nick says that this might be a dev noob question. Dev noob. I love that. I love that word, dev noob question. But are you implementing any interfaces / abstractions in the app? Technically, I am by putting. It's hard to really say because there's always a rebuttal, right? Like you can always kind of probably argue one way or the other. But I am trying to, or pretty much creating an abstraction when, for example, the device connection, right? I'm basically saying, hey, plug in, give me an IP address and some credentials, and I'll return to you a NetMiko device connection, right? Something that's prepped and ready. I'm not saying, hey, provide this to me and plugging it all in right in front of you. But like if you were to use this code base, you could just say, all right, I want to create a device connection, use this device connection function, plug in a couple arguments, and you're good. Same thing with the discover device, right? I'm expecting a connect handler to be passed in, and what will be returned is a device record, right? So it's kind of, you can call that abstraction, you could call that what you will, but basically you're not worried about. Perfect example. You don't have to know what a connect handler even is, right? I could tell you and say, hey, check out my code. This device connection function will return a device connection for you. And you say, okay, I need a device connection, and then I need to discover the device. Could these be combined into one function? Absolutely. Could I create some sort of kind of another level of abstraction to where all you want to do is discover the device and add it to inventory? Sure, I could take those functions and create another level of abstraction. So as far as the kind of that abstraction, I hope that answers your question. Because I guess to summarize, my definition of an abstraction is something to where you don't have to really understand what's going on in the background, but you understand what you're trying to get to or where you're trying to get. So, Nick, I hope that answers your question, and trust me, I definitely couldn't be wrong, and people might be like, oh no, oh absolutely not. And that's fair. I'm open to learning. So anyone watching this as a VOD or on demand later, please, if you feel that there's I'm wrong, or if there's anything I can make better, drop in the comments, message me on Twitter, whatever. All right. So, anyways, let me go back to refresh the inventory here. Matt says the stream looks better than a couple weeks ago. Thanks. So last week I started streaming on. I got the new MacBook Air with the M2 chip. And so I'm starting to stream on it, and hence why the camera is looking up at me versus straight on at me, because I'm using actually the laptop's camera, and I'm still using my mic setup. So yeah, I'm glad it looks better. That was my goal. I wanted to get a Mac for development purposes, but I was like, oh, I could maybe double it up, to take over some of the streaming stuff too. So I'm glad it's working for both. All right. And the last thing that we took care of was, besides the actual inventory, right? So I created a new table. And just to show you what that looks like. Let's see. Open database. So to show you what the table, so I created a new table called device inventory, and you can see this is what it looks like, right? And it's exactly what the model looks like, right? Management IP, vendor, model, OS version, serial number, device ID. I think we did some of this last week, but just wanted to show this off. And actually two things, and this is probably will be a little cooler. So I figured it out. So with Htmx, and for those that don't know, I've been using a lot of Htmx in this project because I think it's really cool. I'm in no way a front-end dev. I don't really know too much about JavaScript. I know the basics to get by. But so I started using Htmx because it just made sense to me. It's coming from that Python, that kind of back-end development. And so with Htmx you can do something called active search. So I'll type in RT, and it'll bring up all the routers, right? If I want the switches, right? I know I have a small pool of devices. I'll type in switch, right? So all this is working. What it's doing, just to show you, on the back end, it's actually making a GET request. So, if I type RT, you can see it creates, actually, I'm sorry, a post request. I'm sorry, not a GET request. And it looks for, it's basically a post because it sends this string back to say, hey, I'm looking for RT, and it does a database lookup and to find the results, right? So to show you with switch, you type in switch, there's another post request here, and what's returned is that data from the database in, basically throw it in an HTML template and return that template with Htmx. And I put this on Twitter, but I found this to be really cool. So over here in the bottom right, if this is Firefox, I'm sure, well, I know it's possible in Chrome as well. It says no throttling. And so you can actually simulate like your client connection, right? So like DSL, Wi-Fi, 3G, 2G, 4G. So what I did was I went to regular 2G because I want to show you this feature. That's why I'm switching it up on you. And when I type RT again, check out right here by device inventory. You see how it says searching? It pops up with that like cool little graphic. I'll do it again. See how it pops up? So that way, when you get a deployment strategy and how we're going to deploy this, let's say your database is in a separate, could be a container, separate machine. If you deploy it in the cloud, let's say you have it in a different region for whatever reason, if there's at latency, the user is at least prompted to say, hey, we're searching, right? We're still going after it. You're at least getting some sort of feedback. So I thought that was really cool. And that's part of HTMX. It's called an Htmx Indicator. So I got that to work this weekend as well. I'm glad it looks good, but a Mac, seriously? Hey, you get Tux Mac on a Mac? Honestly, I've always used them for work. This is the first one I've like personally owned, and I've liked it a lot. So yeah, I have no complaints. What are the specs of the Mac M2? So it's the MacBook Air, the base specs. I want to say like 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gig solid state. That would be my guess, Blues. Have to look it up, but yeah, it's just whatever it normally comes with. I didn't add anything to it. But yeah, I've liked it. I liked it a lot. All right. So the last thing before we dive into the fun stuff. The API. So as I've said before, I want this to be full parity between API and what you can do in the UI, right? So if we go to API, right? Oops, not API, docs. That's what I meant. So I'm using Fast API, as everyone should know, and with that, you get 2 versions of API documentation that's auto-documented for you, right? And if you set it up properly, right, in the code. So you can see we have kind of 3 different endpoint groups. I created this new one over the weekend called inventory. So basically, you can do, using Postman, using your favorite curl, whatever. You can do, call it whatever, netcheck.com/API v1 inventory devices to get all the devices. I also downloaded this additional package that allows pagination. It's not exactly, so I will give a shout out here to Daniel Wallace on Twitter. He pointed out, so I thought I had a cool post where I was like, wow, it's so easy to paginate. I was using this library here it's literally just called Fast API Pagination. And all you do is you can just put in basically a list of results into this paginate function, and it will create all this for you, these parameters, the page and size. But the issue I'm doing still is the point of pagination is you're doing a limited request to your database, right? So instead of saying select star from database, or from the table name, you're supposed to say select and put a limit on, an offset and limits on your results, right? So that way you're not querying and getting the results of the entire database and then cutting down on it. But in my code, I'm still doing all of that. I'm still doing a select all, and then I'm feeding all of those results into this paginate function. And then from there, the user can choose what they want to limit and stuff. So it's kind of backwards, but just to show you what it looks like, right? So click try it out. Just one page, and let's say I want to do only the first 5. Well, let me see how many results there are. I think there's like 15, but let me check. 20. All right, so I tried it out. You can see here it adds the query parameters for me. Page equals 1, size equals 20, and you see the response body, right? So you see host name, management IP, and like I could basically now use this API, right? So it's kind of neat because the reason I'm creating an API alongside the web UI is so you don't have to choose like, oh, I got to do everything through NetCheck, right? Like you don't have to pass that off to a network admin. You can use the tool however you want. You can add devices via the API. You can get the devices from the API. This is kind of where I think Matt brought it up a couple weeks ago, where we can create an integration point, between, let's say, Netbox, where you already have an inventory or a single source of truth. As long as it fits into our schema, you can feed that data into NetCheck or create that, where NetCheck pulls data from Netbox and then formats it to what it needs to store it in its database. It's pretty awesome. Once you realize that, basically an API is a contract, and an interface to, for software to talk to one another, it's almost, the possibilities are endless in my mind. So you're not, Nick's asking, so you're not implementing any default pagination at this time. Surprised that module doesn't do any of that for you. So it's very interesting, and I'm still trying to understand the module a little bit. So you see by, you did. By default, the default value is 1 and 50, right? But I think it might make more sense if I show you the code as well. So if you do a get to inventory, or I'm sorry, I forgot the API right here. Oops. So if you do, let's say you want to get all devices, so it's not necessarily a module or a library specific issue. It's more my issue and the way I wrote the code, right? So you can see I created a results variable that does a select on the device inventory table, and I just get all the results, right? And then what I do is I take the results, which the results, like this results variable, looks literally just like this, where it's a list of items, and each object is an item in the database. My problem is I already wasted the cycle of doing a select all, basically, select star, and then I paginate the results. The thing I need to do, and actually I was trying to read up on this before I started the stream, was querying. So you can add query parameters, so like limit and offset. So it's different with every framework. So I'm using SQL Model, which I've talked about it before. Same author as Fast API. And it sits on top of SQL. It's basically, SQL Model is basically the combination of SQL Alchemy and Pydantic. So it has that parsing and kind of type declaration that Pydantic has, mixed with SQL Alchemy to interact with the database. So yeah, you kind of get both of that in SQL Model. So anyways, I found this here where it feeds in, or it accepts an offset, a limit, and then what you do is see how you execute, you do a select, but you can see it feeds in the offset and it feeds in the limit, and then it gets all results. If you see what I do, I just do the select and I just say, just get it all. So I don't do any sort of limit or offset here. And so that's the problem, is I need to introduce that. Because that querying the database is the expensive transaction out of all of this. So the paginate helps because it's like, okay, because I could read, because whenever I do this, right, whenever I do try it out and I do, like, I could plug in whatever number here, right, but in the background when I do this API call, it gets all the results, right? It really doesn't do any pagination. It already makes that transaction, and then from here I'm just saying, I only want the first 50, even though you pulled all 1,000 records, I only want the first 50, right? So hopefully that helps. Some ACI talk in there. Contract. No, not the same as ACI. Speaking of ACI, quick shout out. John Capobianco is doing I don't know if his stream's still going. I was in it for just a hot minute, around like 7:30, and he was doing a stream. He's doing something with ACI where it looks like he's creating the mind maps, the CSVs. You know how he is. Documenting the network through his means, using via ACI. So I thought that was kind of cool. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, Nick. Yeah. Hopefully that helps. Yeah, it's my fault. I saw his ACI business ready tweet. Yeah. So he's starting up the stream, doing more streaming, which is cool. I think it's very neat that we can, you have the opportunity to stream your development and make mistakes on stream and talk about them, because too many times, like, okay, so perfect example, and I'm guilty of it, and I'll call it out. Like this weekend, right? I was going through making some really good strides with development, and saying, oh wow, it's this easy to paginate my API results. It's this easy to do that. And if someone was just reading my Twitter, they'd be like, damn, this guy, like, all he does is just win after win after win. And then I'm like, no, if you sit for one of my streams, there's been plenty. How many times have I been on stream and have got zero accomplished because I run into problems or I can't figure something out. So I think streaming and really without cuts or edits, I think it really helps allow people to understand, hey, these people don't just like. It's not like all of their development is all edited, right? We run into the same problems you do. We're just making fun of ourselves on stream. So, all right. So so we have the inventory endpoint group, and you can. And just before I close this up. You can see I get the inventory results. I could get it by a device ID. right? So we talked about the primary key last week. So I know there's like 15 devices. So let's say I want just device ID 2. Okay, you can see it's RT-1 10111 Cisco. It's a 9500 running 1766, blah, blah, blah. So very common, by the way, to use device ID. I'm trying to think, Meraki, DNA Center. I don't know. DNA Center, I think it's a query parameter in DNA Center. I forget the API. But I know like Meraki goes, everything's by ID. Organizations, networks, devices, like everything's by ID. And it makes sense, right? Because that's your one unique value. Whereas if you did it by host name, it may not be as unique, right? Might have the device in there multiple times. It's device ID, like any sort of, unique identifier really helps. But so the last endpoint here is to delete a device ID, right? So we had that 2, device ID 2, and let's just try it out real quick. So you see 1, 2, I know they're the same device. So these are all dummy records, so don't get on me about it. I literally just, I try to fill in the database. All right, so you'll see like we'll get rid of one of these routers and we'll get rid of device ID 2. So if we go down here, we'll try it out. Device ID 2, execute. We get a 204. There's no response. That's normally what you get when you do a delete. A 204 no content is actually like, the true response code, or I'm sorry, status. And so if we go back up here, we'll do an execute one more time. And you'll see right here, device ID 2 is gone. So pretty cool stuff, right? We're making strides. I don't stream at all because all I do is fail. Yeah. Nah, it's fine. And that's the thing too, like people are like, oh well then like, everyone should stream to like, it's like, well, there's a lot of, people, there are people that it does take a specific attitude to put yourself out here to be, to fail and do that sort of stuff. And it does take a little bit of planning as well to stream. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to just turn on my camera and turn on, my mic. So, all right. So now we have 2 different tables. We have one for test results that are for all the validation stuff. We have another table for inventory. There's really no relation yet between here. I have thought about how I'm going to tie in the relation, because the validation, you can run multiple devices against different tests. So I'm trying to figure that piece out. But for right now, because everything's 1-to-1, we're just going to keep it as is. But yeah, that's definitely something in the future I got to figure out. All right. So tonight, what we're doing, because we went through everything I wanted to cover, the inventory, the API endpoints, and just for those that are curious, the way this is all implemented, I actually am proud to show this off, by the way, because I will say I do have messy code sometimes, but so Fast API has this concept of an API router. I believe Flask, you can, I know Flask has the concept of a blueprint where basically it kind of creates a hierarchy, if that makes sense, right? So for example, I created an API router object here called API_router. And what we did was include other routers. And these different routers are those different API endpoints or endpoint groups. So we have analysis, validation, and inventory. The way that this all works is using this tag system with Fast API. So if I go to inventory.py here, you'll see I have the route, right? You'll first see I have a router object, I just called router. And it's to /devices. And the tag here is inventory, right? You can have a list of tags, by the way. That's why it's in the square brackets. And you see the different results, right? We do a get, we do a, get by device ID, and then we do a delete by the device ID. And you can see all the database operations that happen here, right? Where we pull it, and so on. But what's interesting is once you have all that tagged and you import the router from the inventory module, which I just pulled up here, from this endpoint group, you can see that I have a prefix as well, right? So this is really cool because it allows you to better manage your endpoints. So if you go back to the documentation, you'll see that everything starts with inventory and then devices, right? Inventory and then devices, device ID, inventory. So I'm not manually writing out these long endpoint names, right? So if you work backwards, you can see we have devices, and then it belongs to the inventory group or tagged with inventory. And then if you go back here, you can see that we include it to the main, call it the main API router. And we have a prefix of /inventory, right? So now you know where inventory /devices comes from, right? Because you understand you see where that API router comes in. So then you're like, okay, where /API/v1, like, is that by default, or is this like, where does this come from? So this is what I think one of the cooler parts here. If you go to, let me find it here. I think it's in main here at the top. I'm sorry, flying all around. Right here. So we have the app. We've instantiated an app, which just a fast API app, and we include the router API router. And where do we get that from? That is from this file. That is this high level API router that includes all these other endpoint. I'm going to just call them endpoint groups, right? So now we're in our main file and we include that router, and then we put a prefix on that for /API/v1, right? So hopefully that kind of makes sense. And like I said, I only share that because I'm kind of proud of it as far as the organization is. And the best part about it, I think, is if I want to version it, let's say, you always hear about, we're releasing version 2 of our API next year, right? And it takes a while to sunset the first one. Instead of sunsetting and like completely like just saying, all right, I'm going to change this to V2 now, and all these prefixes change to V2, I can keep both of them alive and working. All I have to do is go to, if you can see where like the folder structure, the breadcrumbs here, I have an API_v1 folder. All I got to do is create a new folder called API_v2, and I could literally copy and paste this whole, folder structure. And you can see that I could just create a new API router and we could call it V2. And then we import that folder structure, right? We import that API router and then just call it a new prefix. So that way we could have two working versions, V1, V2, two different versions of the API. So pretty cool stuff. I don't think I've ever went through that. And so I just felt that, this was the right time to do that. Blues ask, is there any validation in the inventory for duplicate entries? Not right now, no. So you could pop in the same host name and IP twice. I don't really have any of that. I could, whenever I go to actually store it, I could make sure that it's a unique host name or a unique IP address. I most likely will go by IP address. because for whatever reason, let's say that you do have multiple host names, but they have different IPs. I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a logic, splitting up a logical device. But yeah, not right now. I haven't gone through any of that yet. Sounds cool, Dan. Really interesting implementation. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. Yeah, I like spent a little bit of time and I was like, okay, it's pretty freaking sweet. I actually felt for once I was like, oh, I organized my code right. All right, these are all those dummy test results. All right, what was I gonna start? So there's a few things, but I think the one thing I want to do tonight is do the unit testing. So let me go to, real quickly, I'm not getting sidetracked. I just want to show you. So if you do, with Fast API, if you do /docs, all this is auto-generated for us. And this actually stems from, because all of our data models, well, it stems from just, I guess, our data models. I guess that's where I was getting to. I ruined the secret. But if you do /docs, it brings you to this. But if you do /redocs, maybe not. Never mind. There's an alternative. I forget what it's called. I thought it was redocs, and it would show you like, it would basically just show it in a different format. So anyways, not super important. All right. So what you'll notice here is I have this badge here called CodeCov, and I think I may have talked about it, but basically what it does is it generates a bunch of different reports on the code coverage that you have within your tests, right? So what code is covered under your unit tests. And you can see here we have a bunch of it. All this stuff is kind of built into this CodeCov platform. You don't have to use CodeCov, just to be 100% honest with you. But you do use, I believe it's coverage py. So this is the library. It's called coverage.py. It measures your code coverage. I will give a disclaimer right now because it has to be said, and you hear it a lot, and I just want to reiterate. The more code coverage you have doesn't necessarily mean you have less bugs in your code. It just means you've wrote the right test to cover your code, right? As far as like making sure it's correct. Code coverage is meant to just kind of give you like a feeling like, okay, how much of my code have I written tests for? But don't get it confused with, hey, I have 100% code coverage. That means I don't have any bugs. It's just not the way it works. So anyways, this coverage, it runs with Pytest, and you can see here, it runs with Pytest, unit test, and nose test. Obviously, unit test and Pytest are one of the two popular testing frameworks. And you can see here, you just run coverage run, and then you run it with Pytest. And then here's the coverage report. So it actually will tell you, what lines of code are missing from, in this one file, we have this many statements, 4 lines are missing that aren't covered with your test, your current unit tests, and so you have 80% coverage for that file. Same thing with this module, you have 89% coverage for that file, and then a total of 87%. Right, and then there's different ways to view it. You can view it in HTML. I think there's a couple different ways you can view the reports. Right here, text, HTML, XML, JSON. For advanced uses, there's an API. You can even put the result data in a SQLite database, right? The way I'm choosing is I'm actually saving the data. I have my GitHub repo integrated with this third-party tool called CodeCov, And what it does is it takes your code coverage report that you saw there and makes cool visuals of it. And on top of it, it adds in a nice cool little badge there. Obviously, I'm failing right now. It's at 40%. But if you go to trying to think of a good repository, maybe Scrapply. I think Scrapply might have code coverage on it. Yeah, so this is a perfect example, right? Code cov is at 90%. So he almost has all, Carl almost has all of his code covered under unit tests, or tests, right? So, anyways. So just wanted to give you kind of a brief overview with that. Blue says, use Pytest to test your code. Yeah, exactly. So funny enough, Blues, you were asking about my laptop earlier. And I mentioned this in the last stream. So Pytest, for whatever reason, does not run its tests on Apple Silicon. So I can run Pytest run job, and for whatever reason, it doesn't run. It doesn't pick up that my tests are there, my test cases are there, and just basically returns an empty test result. So, I mean, it's no digs at Pytest. I'm just saying you brought it up, so I figured I'd mention it again because I wasn't sure if you were in the last stream at that time. Nick says, how are you keeping track of all the features, implementations you want to implement in NetCheck? Kanban board, comments in the code, something else? I'm actually using this app called Todoist. And it's kind of like a checklist app. You can change the views in it. I brought it up on stream before, but I use it for a lot of personal things, so I try not to bring it up too much because I don't want to have too much personal stuff just kind of showing up. I mean, I do everything from we'll do like bills, grocery lists, my workout, keeping track of reps and weight and that sort of thing. But yeah, I use this app called Todoist. I've used Notion before. It's just a lot. There's just so much in there. It's hard to get started and or it's almost like you need a Udemy course just on Notion. There's just so much to do with it. So yeah, but I use an app called Todoist. Probably need to bring it up on stream more often than not, just because I'll get lost in the sauce. So, but yeah, Todoist. All right. All right, let's check out some unit tests. Oops. So, by the way, before I get started with unit tests, so coverage PY does checks for coverage of your unit tests. Obviously, we're using Pytest for that to actually run the testing. And here's the Pytest documentation. If you've never seen it before, highly recommend you go through it. There's a lot to take in. I'm still learning myself, so what you see here, what we do tonight, maybe teach you something, maybe teach you something the wrong way. I apologize if it does. As always, I'm learning just as much as you are. But basically, create the assertions are the big thing, right? You make sure that assert this value equals that, that this object is an instance of this, and so on. So there's a lot of ways to do that. But what I wanted to show you was there's a testing framework, because you might be like, okay, that's great for Python code, but what about your front end? What about when a user wants to add a device? How do you verify that thefunctionality doesn't break? Let's say when you make a JavaScript change or some sort of front end change. There's actually there's two. There's one called Selenium, So this one has been kind of the de facto for a while. It's basically you can tell it to locate items using different HTML attributes. So you can locate an item by the ID, and you could say, all right, now that we've located an item, what do you want to do? Click it, fill out text with it, and so on, right? But I've recently found this other one that's sponsored by Microsoft called Playwright. And it integrates with Pytest, which I think is kind of neat. And it's way easier. It's so much easier. Like Nick, you brought up abstraction earlier. It's so freaking easy. So here, all we do is, I mean, you could read it plain English. I don't even have to go through it, but create a, test my application.py, go to this page. You expect from that page that you went to have a title of, and you can do a regex, right, to validate. We want to locate the text that equals get started, and that we expect this get started, right, this text to have an href to docs intro. We want to click on get started, and then we expect that page to have a URL to .intro or .start intro. How freaking cool is that, Like, that's so easy to test, right? So there's that piece of it. And then the final piece is the API, right? Because if you're going to advertise, I have an API, integrate with, you can integrate Netbox, you can integrate whatever. You can integrate any tool you want because I have an API, you have to have ways to test it to ensure that it doesn't break based on, let's say you change a couple routes around, or you change, worst case, you change, your database schema, right? And let's say you didn't do proper migrations or anything like that, and all of a sudden your API doesn't return the data properly, right? Like that sort of stuff. So that luckily you can use, like in our case, since we're using Fast API, you can actually run tests. They have a mock client that you can use to do like a GET request against your own API and validate the results that way. And that's actually what we're going to do tonight, is do some more add our tests for the inventory endpoint. And that way we have a little more test coverage on the API. And for those that may be asking, I'm doing test-driven development completely backwards. I got too excited and build out the feature before I added tests. So with test-driven development, for those that don't know, you normally build out the tests and say, hey, I want this to look like this, right? So I expect whenever I do /inventory/devices, I expect back a list of devices, and in this way, and then do an assertion from there, right? And then you build the feature versus build the feature and then create the test afterwards. So I just want to be clear with that. This is not test-driven development. I'm writing the tests afterwards. I've learned unit test module from DevNet. Should I also learn Pytest? One of the best books, Python Testing with Pytest, 2nd edition. Interesting, Blues. I did not. Python testing. I'll look that up real quick. Python testing with Pytest, 2nd edition. Interesting. I'll have to take a look. Oh, this guy here, Brian Oken. I listened to the Talk Python to Me podcast, and I believe he's sometimes on it. It's either that one or Python Bytes. I think it's Python Bytes. I listen to like 2 Python podcasts. I'm such a nerd. But I learned a lot from especially Michael Kennedy on Talk Python to Me. But he's on one of them, this Brian guy, the author. So I'll have to check it out, Blues. If you're recommending it, you're saying it's a pretty good book. But Nick, to answer your question, yes. Pytest, I would say, is from what I've seen, is more popular than unit test. That's purely based on my perspective and experience. So I could be wrong, but I've seen Pytest more often than not versus unit test. I think the reason people use unit tests is because it's part of the standard library, so it doesn't require like additional dependencies. If it's on O'Reilly, I'll take a look. Yeah, I mean, totally. I will say, Nick, that you're probably, if you just want to get an understanding of what it is and do some like simple hello world, I would recommend checking out the documentation for it first. And that way you get a better understanding of like what to expect when you're writing these tests. And then you also can see the difference between this and like a unit test. So, but yeah, just docs.pytest.org. Bunch of good information in here. I've gone through this documentation a few times. Definitely don't remember all of it, and there's surely some stuff that I'm gonna miss whenever I write these tests out. But pretty good documentation if you want to start here. But yeah, I'll have to check out the book too. All right, so let's get to some code here. So we will go to tests. So right now I have test underscore backend, test underscore frontend. It's not the best, right? Because I have more I've created more modules since I've created these test files. I'll kind of walk through as much as I know, and that way, it may help those that don't know too much about Pytest. So always start the file names off with test underscore, or you can end it with test. But a lot of times you see it where it starts with test. And all of them are located within the test folder. But you'll see here, I have tests for the Pytest. I used to call it the Pytest endpoint. I really should change that, and I'm going to do that now. Pytest. I'm going to change it with the word validation, because I went through and recently just changed all of the endpoints. So I'll go ahead and change that here. Change for validation endpoints. And the reason I called it by the Pytest, and I called the analysis endpoints Batfish at first, because I wanted it just to be very upfront. At least to me, I was like, I need to understand. I need to make sure I understand what I'm interacting with at these different points. And this was like very early on, so it probably sounds really dumb right now. But I was like, I'm using Pytest to validate, and I'm using Batfish to analyze, all the network configs. So it's pretty straightforward here. But you can see I'm initializing a test client. This is from Fast API. And let's pull up that documentation, because it's been a minute since I've kind of looked over it. Fast API docs. Testing. I don't know if it was harder to read with the dark mode or not. So I'm in the testing section with Fast API, and I think this is pretty much what I followed from the get-go, but you create a test client by passing in the Fast API application that we have in main.py. We just create one. Create the functions with a name that starts with test. That's the Pytest convention, as I talked about. using the test client object the same way you do as with requests. So just like we do with requests where we say request.get, request.post, you do the same exact thing, but with the test client. Write simple assert statements. So it's just kind of going through here. It's saying you could also use the Starlet test client. So for those that don't know, Fast API is based on Starlet, which is actually an ASGI versus a WSGI. You might be like, okay, quit with the acronyms. So if you look up Starlet, Python, an ASGI is an asynchronous gateway interface. It's basically for the web. So there's the WSGI, which it's a synchronous interface, and then there's ASGI. And for those, I'll just pull it up here. An asynchronous server. I'm sorry, I forgot the S. Asynchronous server gateway interface, right? And WSGI, which you may hear when you build a Python web app, is a standard for synchronous. So this is kind of the ASGI framework that Starlet provides is what allows Fast API to be asynchronous. Currently, we're not using too much of the asynchronous functionality, not yet. Not because I'm like holding on to it and like I'm enticing you to stick with me, is I just have to figure it out myself on like what functions I want to make asynchronous, right? Because remember, we're in development with this product. And you see there's a test client built on top of requests. So if you go to test client here, you're going to get the same exact thing from Starlet. Import test client. Fast API does the same exact thing. It literally just it inherits from that and kind of just overwrites it. See, yeah, it provides the same test client as Fast API. I know it's very hard to read probably, but yeah, just trust me, it's using the same exact thing as Starlet. So we'll test main.py with your tests, import the app. We've already done all this. We just do a client.get, and then do your assertions. So just like what you do, think about this. When you interact with an API, you convert the the JSON to a Python dictionary, and then you parse through the dictionary. Same thing happens with the assertions. You can take that JSON, you can, make assertions based on things that is going to be there, right? Like the thing for right now is we're making very basic tests to say, hey, if I do a GET request to this endpoint, it better return a status code of 200 if it's a GET request, right? If it's a delete, we're going to hope that it returns a 204 no content. So, and then you can make this real deep, right? Like you can see here, we have a database, interacting with the database. So yeah, and then this is where you kind of get into, okay, now I got to create mock data. And when you create the mock data, as long as it's consistent mock data, then you could use it. You could actually say, hey, I'm spinning up a database, simple database, and I want to get all the results. If I know all the results are kind of these BS values, I know to look for a specific value. And what that does is it allows us to verify that the request works, the endpoint works, the database operation side of it, the ORM, which in our case we're using SQL model, but it could be SQL Alchemy, whatever, that works. And the actual model itself works, right? Because remember, all this is being modeled in a Python class, essentially. So all three pieces work. The data is the data, right? It could be whatever. So that's like, it's not necessarily saying, oh, I got the data. It's all the little pieces that go through that process. All right. So this kind of just goes through Pytest, and so on. So anyways, let's pop over here. So I do create a database. I do create the database and tables and then create test results. I don't have a dummy function or a function to create dummy devices yet. Probably should have did that before I started this, but for now, we'll kind of just stick with the basics. As you can see, it's not like we're not going crazy with testing the API endpoint. I really do need to take the time and create that mock data to allow me to make some other assertions. For example, like assert that the host name found for device ID 1 is equal to RT-1, right? Or something like that, right? So I'm basically, because we go through the same thing here, I'm going to create the same tests, but for the inventory endpoints. And we're getting the inventory devices. Inventory devices 1, and then inventory devices. And this actually should be a 204 because we're doing a delete here. The rest of the the rest of these are gets. I will need to inventory device. And once I get this done, we'll actually create the mock data as well. I know you might be like, wow, all you did was copy and paste. I thought we were going to learn something. We will in a second. Let me, so we created these additional tests, very basic tests. I'm not saying that these will prove anything. And that kind of goes to the thing is, it is technically a small unit test. It just validates that, hey, the route works, but like it doesn't really validate anything else, right? For example, if I delete this device, sure, I get a 204, but like, am I validating that the device is still in the database, right? Because I could technically do an assertion to say, hey, with the data returned from doing a get, can we validate that it's not in the list, right? Or you wouldn't really, I don't know if I would say you would do that, but any one of these other ones you could validate, for example, like the host name, right, of device ID 1 equals, make up something. So, yeah. But let me go over here. So let me see where we made the definitions. Okay, so we did. Oh no, this isn't db.py. This is the one that's in main, right? Yeah. So I got to get this out. Yeah, I got to get that out. Well, this I definitely have to. Selecting the test results. But let me figure out, until I figure out a better place to store this. I'm going to create these 3 results. We're going to say create devices. Inventory devices. So I'm just telling you right now, this is not good practice. You should not be putting these test functions or creating these dummy variables in your main.py file. I need to move all of this, but just because, for the stream purposes, and obviously that's going to take a little more thought, we're just going to keep it in main.py for right now. All right, so now what I need is I need to go to this definition. Oops. Maybe. There we go. Go to definition. All right, so now all we're going to do is grab this device inventory. All right. I'm sorry. Shoot. I don't need to do that. So we're going to just call it hostname. We're going to say the hostname equals RT1. Management IP is 10.1.1.1. The vendor, we'll just call it Cisco. The model, we're going to say it's a 9200 switch. The OS, we're going to say it's 1733. And lastly, the serial number is ABC D12345. Sure. All right, so we'll have this as result 1. I don't need the database or the time. Oh, shoot. Right, and so for those that don't know what's going on, I'm basically just adding it in, or I'm creating a, I'm mocking the device model, right? So like this inventory base, these are like, this here is a table model, right? So it basically inherits from inventory base and then adds on a device ID. And that's the primary key. So it will be automatically, it'll kind of be automatically added. And we'll create another result. We'll create 3 results total. So we'll do RT2 to, we'll say it's a 9300, and we're running 1734A. And instead of ABCD, we'll say ABCD 1 2 3 4 5 or 1 2 3 4 6. Right, and then lastly we'll do a result 3. We'll say it's a 9400, and we'll say this guy's running like 1788. I don't even know if that's out right now, but it's going to be in our little world. And instead of having ABCD, we'll say it's like QWERTY 4321, right? And so now what we'll do is, just like we did here, within the same function, we will add all the results. So what we do here is we connect to the database, we add the results, we commit them, and then we refresh the database. And let me go back to testing the back end. And so now, like I said, not good practice. I'm putting that in just main PY for right now. I'll change that once I find a better place for this or a better way to do it. Because really, I don't need to be writing anything against the database. I could be mocking this data up just in like a Python dictionary. So got to figure that piece out. But like I said, I do want to get some things accomplished on the stream, kind of just to, like I said, a lot of it, I like to kind of teach some things as well. So I don't want to think through all that at this point, but I will probably move some of these things around. So now when I run this Pytest file, it should run all these functions, right? So it'll create a database and tables, it will create the test results, and it will create an inventory and devices, right? And then it will run through all these tests, right? Because they all begin with, all these methods begin with test underscore. And so it'll check validation, it'll check the inventory. Hopefully it will bring that up a little bit. It will bring up the test coverage a little bit, but we did add, a good amount of code as well. So don't know about that. All right, so let me go ahead and open up another terminal here. Pytest, boom. Oh yeah, I forgot. I have to change. I have to do a specific command. Oh yeah, this make file. Yeah, I forgot. So I created a make file because I have to point the Python path into the actual repository. Because basically what happens is when I run these tests, it looks for netcheck.main. Well, where the tests are at, and if you look here, you can see that the tests are in the root folder, and I have all my source code within the NetCheck folder. So technically, to get to the main.py file, you have to go into NetCheck. Hold on, I'm trying to find it here. NetCheck.main. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem, because I was reading from this stuff. The biggest problem, right, because all these paths work out, is once it's in main.py, it's still looking from the perspective of the test file. And so, like, finding API.api, like all these local imports, in the root folder, if I lower this again, you'll see API is not here. It has to be netcheck.api. And you might be like, all right, we'll just add netcheck in front of this. Then the problem becomes within main.py finding API, right? So it's another import issue. I'm sure there's a easy way around it. I've looked before, using kind of global or relative imports. Right now I've just stuck with the relative imports because they work. And honestly, using a simple makefile, it kind of takes care of that issue. But yeah, I've been kind of through import, just a bunch of problems. So I'll do make test, which, like I said, will change the Python path to netcheck and then run pytest. So you'll see here, we had the test run, right? And there's been an assertion, right? So, and I did not do this on purpose, but it's actually a really cool thing. So you'll see here, out of all my tests, one failed. If we could look back through the error messages, you'll see the validation deleting a test API result. So we go back here, delete test API result, or I'm sorry, delete test result. My test said, hey, response, the status code of the response should equal 200. Well, my test actually found that where our assertion was saying is 204 equal to 200. Remember that whenever you delete, and I actually just recently changed this, so I know that why it's failing. Using a delete, you can return a 200. It's not like a bad thing, and I looked into this a little bit, but a lot of times you do have a 204 returning no content, so there's no body return when you delete something, right? So it's actually right. So the response was a 204, and it doesn't equal 200, so this test did fail. So now, if I change this to a 204, And if you see here, my other delete test down here for inventory devices is a 204 as well. So if I change that, save it, and run it again, we should get 11 passes here. Or not. Oh. Interesting. I wonder it's because we deleted in the test, we didn't clean up properly. No row was found. Yeah, I bet that's what it was. And then, and just to test my theory, let me delete the database. Yeah. So the issue was the database file was still there. And so within the tests here, I delete, one of my last tests is to delete an inventory or delete device ID 1. And then when I run the test again, because I didn't clean up the database, which in this case is just a file, but I didn't clean up the mock database properly. And when it runs through the tests again, it tries looking for that device ID 1, which obviously isn't there. And so that's the issue. So what I need to do is as part of the testing, I need to do a cleanup, which is kind of part of, if you do any sort of testing, is there's and honestly, Pytest kind of taught me this and, got me started with it, is there's a common setup where, you set up your test environment. You might configure things as you need to. In our case, getting that mock data set up properly. And then, you do all your testing, and then there's a cleanup phase where, if you create a mock database, like in our case where we actually created a SQLite database, you need to delete or remove the database, right? So that way, when you run your tests again, you create a brand new database. And you can see here, we actually do create a new database in tables, but the problem is it already existed. And for those curious, yes, this is the only database file. So technically it's not a mock database. It's actually it doubles as our production database, but obviously, whenever we're in, I can optimize this code to hit any database. I'm just using the same create database and tables function as I do in main.py. But obviously, I can adopt it and say create dummy database and point it to where, whatever path I want, or call it like dummy database.db, right? So, Pytest --cov, it has a good coverage report. Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned that. I didn't update the results, but yeah, let me do that. So if I go to, and it should be in my make file. That's actually something I want to add. Oh, see, I was looking through the make file. I do have, if I type in make remove db, so I have it back. This is when I made, 9 months ago, I made this make file. I have it backwards. So instead of running the tests, I need to have it like this. So with the make file, this first is it's like a prerequisite. So instead of having tests run before removing the database, I should remove the database and then run my test, right? So when I do make tests, I deleted the database and then it passes. So let me do it again. Removes the database and passes. All right, so that fixed that. I just had that backwards. But yeah, what you were saying blues is pytest --cov. You're right. It should return. There we go. I was going to say it should return a nice coverage report. And so this goes back to that coverage PY documentation I was showing earlier. So you can see that some files are 100%. Some are not. So like as a really good example here, right, our endpoints, we have 94% coverage across the inventory and the validation endpoint groups. And if you go to test backend, that's kind of, that's what we're testing. We're not really testing the analysis piece. So the fact that it's 80%, it's probably because there's only 5 statements, like 5 lines of code. So that's where it gets the 80%, but we don't actually have any sort of test in that file. And yeah, you can kind of go through and see what's tested and what's not. The main file has 163 lines of code, 50% of it's tested. But yeah, so we're still sitting around 40%. So if I were to upload these changes, the CI pipeline would kick off. It would do all this in the background. And actually, I think that's what I may end on here. I'll push these changes that we did. Yeah, the dot coverage, the dot coverage we can remove for sure. Let me add that to the git ignore. Oh, dot coverage star. Okay, so dot coverage star and then the database.db, that can definitely, for that matter, anything .db, we don't need to be storing it up there. So, all right, so what did we do? We added some more tests. We added that function, or that create mock data create the inventory devices, the database records, and yeah, we changed that type hint to say, hey, we're returning a connect handler and the make file. All right, cool. So I will stage this and we'll say added inventory API tests. We'll commit that, and so we'll push this up to GitHub, and let me pop over here. All right, so the cool part is, so you'll see here, I actually have, and I think I went over this in a past stream, this was probably back like last October. So I actually have a CI CD pipeline. It's really a CI pipeline. So what it does is it will set up a Python 3.8 environment. I need to set up a couple more. I am actually running Python 3.9 now. Set up a Python environment, install everything, requirements.txt. It will run my Python, or run Pytest, just like what we did locally. It will run gcov, which creates a coverage report that could be that gets uploaded to codecov, and then the post setup for Python 3.8. I think that's just cleaning up the environment from my understanding, but we can double check here once this is done. So yeah, it's kind of nice because you can do all this stuff locally, and then you push your changes up to GitHub, and it kind of validates you. And on top of that, it's testing it with Python 3.8 right now, and I'm not even using Python 3.8, right? I'm using Python 3.9. And I could set it up multiple tests, right? I can say, set it up with Python 3.8, 3.9, 3.10, 3.11, right? Well, 3.11 is the beta. So, all right. So you can see everything passed. What took the longest was installing all the dependencies. You can review that here. Testing with Pytest, you can see it's the same exact. So the difference being is we changed, instead of being our code report, or I'm sorry, our coverage report was this like CLI output, right? It's just like this text output, easy to read for us. We changed it to XML, and I believe whenever I did this, I believe it was because that's what CodeCov wants, is the XML output. And so we ran that, we got it, the XML output, and then we uploaded it to CodeCov. And you see here, this is all like the nitty gritty of CodeCov. The post run, this is just, I think it's just with GitHub, this is just like the cleanup actions of setting up that that Python environment, and then it just cleans up the job. So now we're good, we're green, the check marks, it wasn't working before, I'll tell you that much. It wasn't working, so we got all that updated. You can see here, not really changed from a CodeCov perspective, sadly. It's still 40%, but we didn't really do anything either. Oh, hold on, let me tell you. Oh, we're at 44.8%. I'm sorry. So we did make, I was gonna say we should have made some change, but like I understand I added a whole inventory page, and we only ran tests against our API. So but yeah, you can see we did make a little more leadway on the coverage. We're at 44.89%, so I'll call it 45% to round up. You can see that they do some additional, out of 565 lines in the NetCheck package, 225 are covered, 340 are not. Obviously the test folder is completely covered because it's the tests themselves. So I'm interested though if this badge updates. Oh, it does update. So yeah, we're at 45%. Incremental gains. So yeah, I think I might stop there. Like I said, I probably I'm gonna do better with the unit tests themselves. Like I said, I try with these streams to make them informative as well. I try not to assume anything. Coming from a network engineer background, I try not to just assume everyone knows what Pytest is, what a unit test may be. And so like these tests that I showed you during the stream, they 100% could be more thorough. Like this is nothing. This is just stating, hey, we ran basically using think of it like this. I use Postman. I ran a call against our application and I returned a 200 status code. But if you've ever interacted with APIs, 200, yeah, that's good. But like, I expect to see 10 results. And what if there's 0 results, right? So anything you can do with Python, it could be like length of the results, or, number of results, specific results, like if there's specific attributes of the results. And this is just testing the API, right? This isn't testing any of the code. So like the modules, for example, and this is probably what I'll jump into probably this weekend, right, is to test this function. So within the inventory module, we have this device connection function. I should be able to put some data or pass in some data here, or I'm sorry, pass in some parameters and be able to figure out whether it works or it breaks, right? So I have to make sure that it kind of validates my logic, validates any sort of exception handling. The issue with some of this is like, how are you going to handle a timeout exception or an authentication exception? So some of this might be tough, but like that's kind of where your type hinting helps you as well. Like if you want an IP address, right? If I put in some sort of wacky IP, is that going to throw an error? In this case, it's not, right? And that's actually my fault. That's something that's not good, because what I'm doing here is saying, I'm literally just saying, all right, yeah, pass in whatever's passed in here, which should be a string, not enforced, by the way, right? This type annotation is not enforced at runtime. This IP address gets passed in. It could be whatever. The string could literally say, like, it could be the device, the model. Someone could have plugged in Cisco, right? And obviously, if you put in Cisco as a host, if it resolves, let's say you do have something internally, like your DNS record, it's the device name as Cisco, and it resolves to an IP, great. But, it should be checked to validate, make sure it's an IPv4 or an IPv6 address. If you want to make it very strict, right? Like if you want to put those guardrails up. So something to think about for next time. So that's all I have for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. And please, I'll wait a minute or so. I know the stream's not too far behind. But if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I really appreciate those that could stop by. If you're watching this later in the future, thank you for watching. And yeah, thanks for joining. Nick, yeah, good stream. Thank you. Thanks, Nick. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions too, you know how to contact me. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions about Pytest, or I know you're still on your dev core grind. So any questions you have, let me know, and I could try to answer them the best I can. Like I said, just because I pass, those tests, doesn't make all my answers 100% correct all the time, right? I'd like to think I have a good grasp on a lot of concepts that that are covered, but no one's perfect. So, but that's what I'm here for. So, all right. Well, no one has any questions. Thanks for tuning in, and I will talk to you all. Trying to think if there's anything going on next week. No, I think I'll be back for the stream next Thursday. Topic will probably be some more development. I'll try to get like a somewhat idea of some more things we can work on. Just at a glance here, let me pull up the NetCheck real quick before we. So at a glance, inventory. We need to. Trying to think. So we have the active search. When we add a device host name and device IP, when I click submit, because it's still a synchronous, function. I want to use some JavaScript to basically disable the button, so that way someone can't keep clicking the button, and also put a little loading indicator next to it to say, all right, hey, just hold on, it's being discovered. So that's kind of something TBD, something small. Custom validation. This is actually a bigger one that I might look at this weekend. If not, it'll be definitely on next Thursday's stream. Along with the name of the test, I'm gonna put in. I need another text box to plug in all the inventory, the devices in inventory that I want to test against. And it'll be multi-select, right? So I'll type in, let's say I type in RT, and that active search, kind of like what we've seen with the inventory, it will pop up all the routers, or all the host names with RT, and then you can multi-select. So you can click one, search again, click another, and then that way you have multiple items that you can run tests against, and that will help create your testbed file. So still trying to figure out how to do that on the back end, but I think it'll be kind of cool. So yeah, Nick says we're all learning. I know I'm not perfect, learning with you. Hey, that's all I ask. It's that as long as you're here learning with me, and yeah, you guys, everyone on the stream, it's been very supportive, and if you're watching the playback of this, thank you again. And yeah, as always, message me if you have questions. And I'm signing off for the night. Thank you, and I will see you next week. See you.
Hold me close till I get up. Time is barely on